Your ancestors really were smarter than you, just not in the way you're picturing. You're picturing a bigger brain. You lose your car keys in your own kitchen. A hunter-gatherer child can point straight at one tree in a rainforest of thousands. Without pausing, here's what's actually happening. Not the kind of smart you'd expect. Scientists went looking for that memory. Not in a lab with wires and screens. In the rainforest and the river villages of Borneo, people with zero schooling remembered just as many words as people with years of it. Same accuracy, almost the same number of mistakes. Anthropologist Victoria Reyes Garcia led the study. She tested 3 hunter-gatherer groups: the Baka, deep in the Congo Basin; the Punan, in the forests of Borneo; the Tsimane, along the rivers of the Bolivian Amazon. 94 people total took part. 24 Baka, 25 Punan, 45 Tsimane. Some had never once sat in a classroom. Researchers didn't just test memory, they tested local knowledge too. They played bird calls and showed animal skulls. They asked people to name the species. They named 10 local medicinal plants out loud, one by one. They asked who could identify each one and who knew how to use it. Most could name and use nearly all 10. Then came the memory test itself. Researchers sat down with each person, one at a time. They read out a list of 16 words. Words for local plants, words for animals, words for food. Then they asked each person to repeat the list back, 3 separate times, spread across several months, to check the memory really held. Here's the assumption you're probably making right now. School should win this test. Reading, writing, structured lessons, every single day. That should beat a childhood spent tracking animals through the trees. Except it didn't. 2 completely different lives, and yet the same raw score. How is that even possible? Reyes Garcia didn't stop at the score. She dug into how each person actually got there, and that's where the 2 groups split apart. Schooled people repeated the words back in the exact order they'd heard them. That's classic rote memory, like reciting a times table or the alphabet. Unschooled people did something else entirely with the same list. They grouped the words by meaning instead of order. Medicine plants went in one cluster, game animals went in another, food items went in a third, all on their own. Their minds built a filing system, live, in real time. Nobody taught them to do that. No teacher, no chalkboard, no lesson plan. It came from a life spent constantly sorting the forest into categories that actually matter for survival. Neither strategy here was worse than the other. They were simply built for different jobs. One brain was trained by a classroom, the other was trained by the forest itself. But this same list of words points to something much bigger. It happened in a place with no rainforest at all. Just ice. In the far north of Greenland, in the 1820s. A plague swept through one isolated Inuit community. Fewer than 150 people lived there. It killed the oldest members first, the most experienced hunters, the most skilled toolmakers, the ones who'd spent decades perfecting their craft. The survivors were left alone with nothing but the ice. They still remembered how to breathe in that cold. What they'd lost was different. It was the knowledge sitting inside those older minds: how to build a kayak that wouldn't roll and drown you, how to carve a bow strong enough to drop a caribou at range. They'd also lost the leister, a 3-pronged spear, built for catching Arctic char in open water. For the next 4 decades, this community lived without any of it. No kayaks on the water, no bows for the caribou herds, no leister for the summer fish runs. Not because a single person had grown less intelligent overnight. Every survivor still had a fully working brain, just like their parents had. Anthropologist Joseph Henrich studied exactly what happened to them next. And this is the reversal that changes everything you just heard about memory and schooling. The surviving Inuit watched the same ice their entire lives, the same seals surfacing at the same breathing holes, the same char running thick through the summer rivers. And still, they never rebuilt a single kayak on their own, not one in 40 straight years of trying and failing. Individually, these people were every bit as sharp as their grandparents had been. So why wasn't that enough on its own? Knowing how to build a kayak was never stored inside one single skull to begin with. It was stored across dozens of skulls, spread out over dozens of years, each person carrying one small piece of a much bigger design. Nobody, not even the smartest survivor, held the whole blueprint alone. Then, in 1862, a group of Inuit sailed down from Baffin Island. They were strangers from hundreds of miles away. They showed the survivors a working kayak frame. They showed them the bow design. They showed them how the leister blade was shaped and mounted. Within a single generation, all 3 technologies were back in daily use. Nobody in that community woke up smarter overnight. The network came back instead. Your ancestors weren't running on bigger individual brains. Not compared to yours, right now. Henrich calls this idea the collective brain. Picture thousands of minds, linked together across generations, each one holding just a fragment. No single person could ever hold the whole thing alone. No hunter-gatherer, however brilliant, sits down and invents a kayak from nothing. It takes a whole chain of people, each one refining the same design, generation after generation, long before you were ever born. This is the real reason a Baka child can name a plant in an instant, or a footprint, or a single bird call. It was never raw individual genius doing that work. It's a lifetime spent plugged into a network of elders, all of them holding pieces of the same knowledge, tested and refined over centuries. In that one stretch of forest, you have a version of that network too. It just doesn't look like elders gathered around a fire. It looks like a phone sitting in your pocket, a search bar you type into without thinking, a doctor pulling up a drug interaction in 10 seconds, a mechanic checking a torque spec instead of guessing, a pilot running a checklist built by thousands of other pilots, an engineer leaning on a formula somebody else already proved, a group chat full of people who already know the exact thing you don't. Think about how often you actually use it. You don't memorize every fact you might need. You memorize where to find the fact fast. That's not laziness. That's the same collective brain strategy your ancestors were already running. It's just wearing a different shape now. Ask yourself how many things you know that you couldn't actually explain. Your bank balance without opening the app. Your best friend's number without your contacts list. Most people can't, and that's completely fine. Offloading knowledge onto a network isn't a modern shortcut. It's the oldest survival trick our species ever built. You're not smarter than your ancestors were. You're also not dumber than they were either. You're plugged into a far bigger network than they ever had access to. Roughly 8 billion connected minds. Instead of one small village passing down a handful of hard-won skills by firelight. So which one of you actually holds more knowledge? Neither of you. Really. Not alone. Not your ancestors sitting around their fire. Not you, scrolling on your phone. The real question was never about the size of anyone's brain. It's about the size of the network feeding into it. Your ancestors really were smarter than you, just not the way you were picturing it at the start. They were never carrying that knowledge alone. And neither, it turns out, are you.